Beneath the dust of forgotten archives and the silence of sealed vaults lies a history that was never meant to be spoken aloud. These are not tales of triumph written in textbooks, but fragments of whispers buried in black ink, scattered like broken glass across the shadow of a war that reshaped the world. Every hidden file suggests something left unfinished, something that slipped between the cracks of official memory. Ghost convoys swallowed by the sea, airfields carved into frozen wilderness, networks of agents moving unseen in the ruins of Europe. The deeper you look, the more the lines blur between survival and betrayal, between the victors and the defeated. What lingers are not certainties, but questions. Why were so many pages torn from the record? Who decided what truth could survive, and what remains buried in silence, waiting for those willing to search the shadows? Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Ruthless. On September 19, 1941, Winston Churchill approved a plan that even by the ruthless standards of wartime deception bordered on desperation. The scheme, drafted by Flight Lieutenant Ian Fleming of Naval Intelligence and signed off under the seal of the Director of Naval Intelligence, was codenamed Operation Ruthless. Its objective was clear: capture an intact German weather ship, seize its cryptographic material, and deliver the prize to Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing's teams struggled against the evolving Enigma codes. Official accounts of Ruthless suggest the mission was never attempted, abandoned due to poor conditions. Yet fragments buried in Admiralty files, uncovered decades later, paint a darker and more ambiguous picture. These documents, memos marked "most secret, destroy after reading," speak of a crew that vanished without explanation in the Bay of Biscay. The operation called for a modified German bomber, likely a Heinkel He-111 captured in 1940, to be disguised as a downed Luftwaffe aircraft. A hand-picked crew of RAF men fluent in German, supported by an MI6 linguist, would stage a crash landing near a Kriegsmarine weather ship. Once taken aboard as survivors, they were to overpower the crew, seize codebooks, and signal a Royal Navy trawler waiting off the coast of France. On paper, it was an audacious but surgical maneuver. What remains buried is what happened once the aircraft left British airspace. An RAF Coastal Command flight log dated October 2, 1941 lists Special Duty Flight, Lost Contact, Bay of Biscay, and marks the names of 3 airmen with a red cross. None of those names appear in standard records of war dead, an omission too deliberate to be chance at accounts surfaced after the war from Spanish fishermen in Galicia who swore to have seen debris of a military aircraft floating on September 25, 1941. Among them were reports of dinghies with uniformed men speaking English and German. 2 fishermen claimed they witnessed these survivors being taken aboard a patrol boat flying German naval colours. Within weeks, Gestapo reports forwarded to Admiral Canaris at the Abwehr referenced unidentified Anglo-infiltrators captured during coastal operations. No official German records survive, but cross-references in fragmentary intercepts suggest prisoners from an unacknowledged incident were transferred from La Coruña to Berlin under Gestapo guard. Bletchley Park's internal history, classified until the 1970s, records a delay in the delivery of naval Enigma key sheets during the autumn of 1941, a period that saw U-boat wolfpacks inflict severe losses on Atlantic convoys. The official explanation was technical: weather disruptions and failed reconnaissance, yet a marginal note in one decrypted Abwehr message hints otherwise. London fails to recover Caesar's cargo. Caesar was a code word the Germans sometimes used for cipher materials. If the Allies had indeed attempted Ruthless and failed, it may explain why convoys HX-156 and SC-48 suffered catastrophic losses that same October. The question remains why no record of the captured men exists in post-war archives. The Red Cross lists no British prisoners transferred under those dates. The War Graves Commission holds no entries for the names crossed out in the Coastal Command log. Instead, the surviving files from MI6 carry only terse notations: account closed, do not trace. This phrase, repeated across multiple disappeared agents, suggests an intentional erasure. Former SOE officer Peter Wilkinson, in an unpublished 1971 interview, claimed that Churchill's staff ordered the records sealed to conceal the presence of a double agent inside the Admiralty. Wilkinson referred cryptically to one of ours reporting to Canaris, suggesting Ruthless may have been betrayed before it left the runway. Some circumstantial evidence supports this. A surviving letter from Admiral Karl Dönitz to Hitler in early October 1941 describes unexpected advantage gained in cryptographic defense through enemy incompetence. Though vague, historians note the timing coincides exactly with the alleged loss of the Ruthless crew. If the Germans captured British officers carrying incriminating documents, they may have learned of the Allies' intent to seize Enigma material. This could have prompted the abrupt tightening of cipher distribution by the Kriegsmarine in late 1941, delaying Allied success at sea until the introduction of new capture operations in 1942. Eyewitnesses add to the puzzle. In 1963, a retired Abwehr translator named Otto von Gessner gave testimony to West German authorities that he had interrogated 3 British airmen captured in Spain, pretending to be Luftwaffe survivors. He insisted they were executed at Sachsenhausen concentration camp under Himmler's orders in early 1942. No corroborating files exist, yet von Gessner's account matches closely with the missing names in the Coastal Command log. Whether he embellished or confessed to truth remains uncertain, but the testimony aligns with the persistent rumors circulating in intelligence circles that Operation Ruthless was not a paper plan, but a mission that cost lives. Further confusion arises from a declassified 1946 US Navy report. Entitled Special Allied Operations in the Atlantic Theater, the report lists among unknown casualties a mission described as ruse involving downed aircraft. Biscay, September 41st, lost without record. The US analyst noted the lack of follow-up as highly irregular. When questioned decades later, former OSS officer William Casey admitted that his office received no after-action report for Ruthless and that London buried it deeper than anything else. That level of suppression suggests the incident revealed a vulnerability so dangerous that both Britain and Germany had reason to erase it. Conspiracy or not, the impact was tangible. During the crucial months of autumn 1941, U-boat sinkings of merchant convoys nearly strangled Britain's supply lines. Historians often credit American Lend-Lease and the growing escort fleet with preventing collapse. Yet if Ruthless had succeeded in its original objective, Bletchley might have broken the U-boat cipher months earlier, sparing hundreds of ships. The silence around Ruthless thus hides not only the fate of a vanished crew, but a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1999, a fragment of aluminum wreckage was recovered by Spanish divers in the Bay of Biscay. Stamped with a faded serial number, it was traced to a Heinkel aircraft captured by the RAF in 1940 and listed as stored at RAF Ford. Official RAF paperwork stated the aircraft was dismantled in 1942. The recovered fragment proves otherwise. The Ministry of Defense has refused comment. For families of the missing men, whose names were never publicly acknowledged, the silence endures. For historians, the wreckage is the closest thing to proof that Operation Ruthless left the runway and never returned. What began as a desperate gamble to capture a cipher book has become one of the war's most elusive shadows. Neither Britain nor Germany had reason to admit its outcome. To this day, the fate of the vanished convoy in the Bay of Biscay lingers in classified footnotes, erased rosters, and whispered testimonies. Whether betrayed from within or simply lost to the brutal efficiency of the Abwehr, the men of Operation Ruthless became phantoms of the Atlantic War, their mission denied, their records destroyed, their deaths uncounted. Only the fragment of a downed aircraft, rising decades later from the cold waters of Spain, remains as evidence that history's official story was never complete. Chapter 2: The Underground Vaults of Dresden Steel. On the night of February 13, 1945, the skies above Dresden turned to fire. Over 1,200 RAF and USAF bombers reduced one of Germany's most celebrated cities to ash in what became one of the most devastating raids of the Second World War. Official histories portray Dresden as a cultural target with limited strategic value, struck primarily to break civilian morale and disrupt transport networks. Yet buried within fragmentary files of the Soviet NKVD and the Allied Control Council lie references to something deeper, an industrial secret hidden beneath the Saxon soil. Witness testimony, combined with confiscated documents, suggests that Dresden was more than a city of art and opera. It was a vault, concealing technologies and archives the Reich intended to keep out of Allied hands until the very last day. In the final weeks before the bombing, reports from local civilians describe truck convoys moving by night from the outskirts of Leipzig into Dresden. The vehicles bore the insignia of the Wehrmacht's Armaments Office and were escorted by detachments of the SS Technical Emergency Corps. They entered the grounds of the Grosse Heine Strasse steelworks, a sprawling industrial complex that had been partially shut down since 1944 due to lack of raw materials. Yet witnesses swore the furnaces roared back to life in early February, fueled not by production, but as a cover for digging and sealing tunnels beneath the works. Among those who spoke after the war was a Czech forced labourer, Jan Havel, who claimed he had been ordered to assist in hauling sealed wooden crates into a reinforced shaft. Each crate, marked with Reichsadler stamps, bore stenciled codes beginning with Junk Propulse 109, a reference consistent with Messerschmitt jet propulsion components. When Dresden burned, the entrances to these tunnels collapsed or were deliberately sealed. The devastation was so complete that post-war Allied survey teams overlooked them. But when Soviet troops of the First Ukrainian Front entered the city days later, their internal reports, now partially declassified, recorded the immediate cordoning off of several blocks surrounding the steelworks. NKVD Colonel Sergei Antonov described in a 1946 memorandum the recovery of sensitive crates containing technical documents and parts, including schematics for turbine assemblies and experimental chemical compounds. The crates were not transferred to local German authorities, but shipped directly to Moscow under special guard. Publicly, the Soviets insisted Dresden had no industrial importance. Privately, they treated its ruins as a restricted military site for over a decade. American intelligence suspected as much. Operation Safe Haven, launched in late 1944, sought to trace Nazi assets hidden abroad or buried in Germany itself. While Safe Haven uncovered caches of art, gold, and industrial patents, Dresden remained a gap. A 1947 US report bluntly noted, "No inspection authorized, zone sealed by Soviet units." The frustration was clear. If Dresden had indeed held advanced weapons research, it would have fed directly into Soviet technical programs, including the rapid development of their jet fighters and chemical weapons. What should have been an Allied prize became instead a Cold War bargaining chip. The mystery of Dresden deepened in 1952, when a Norwegian geologist, Dr. Arvid Holm, conducting aerial surveys for mining purposes, spotted unusual heat anomalies beneath the rubble of the city. Despite years of inactivity, thermal readings suggested machinery or residual chemical processes still at work underground. Holm reported his findings to NATO channels, but declassified records show his data was buried under a restricted classification. Independent investigations years later confirmed that Soviet engineers had reinforced underground chambers in Dresden well into the 1950s. Local Germans were barred from approaching the sites, and rumors spread of ghostly noises beneath the rebuilt city streets. Eyewitness accounts strengthen the suggestion of something extraordinary. In 1946, a Dresden survivor named Lotte Weber gave testimony to German authorities that she had seen SS men unloading barrels labeled E.g. Farben, Leuna, shortly before the bombings. These barrels, she said, emitted a sharp, metallic odor and were handled with extreme caution. IG Farben, the chemical conglomerate behind much of Germany's synthetic fuel research, was known for experimental high-energy compounds. Documents seized at Farben's Leverkusen plant describe chemical fuels under development for advanced aircraft. Whether these barrels contained such material remains speculative, but their presence in Dresden aligns with the theory of an underground vault. Further corroboration comes from aerial photographs released in 1991, taken by U-2 reconnaissance flights over East Germany during the height of the Cold War. Among the targets catalogued was Zone D27, Dresden North. The photographs revealed faint rectangular outlines beneath the surface, resembling the remains of tunnels or bunkers, some aligned with the coordinates of the wartime steelworks. Analysts noted that the ground disturbances did not match civilian construction. In one image, a collapsed shaft was clearly visible, with earth coloration indicating reinforced concrete beneath. US intelligence tagged the area as a possible storage site, legacy Nazi project. Yet, the files remained buried until the collapse of the Eastern Bloc allowed access. For decades, local rumors persisted. In 1956, a group of Dresden miners tasked with clearing rubble near the Neustadt district stumbled upon a sealed tunnel lined with steel plates. Before they could explore further, East German police arrived and forced the miners off the site. One worker, later interviewed after the fall of the Berlin Wall, recalled seeing stacked crates, stamped with numbers beginning with V7. Historians note that V7 was not an official designation of known Nazi weapons, but has long been associated with rumors of experimental, disc-shaped aircraft or propulsion prototypes. Whether the crates actually bore such markings, or whether the memory was coloured by later speculation, remains unknown. What is certain is that the tunnel was sealed with reinforced concrete within days. The implications of the Dresden vaults stretch beyond the war itself. Soviet jet technology advanced with startling speed after 1945, culminating in the MiG-15, which shocked Western pilots in Korea. While Soviet scientists had undeniable skill, questions linger as to whether they benefited from captured German research. If Dresden truly concealed advanced blueprints or prototypes, the NKVD's swift seizure of the site may explain part of this leap. The secrecy surrounding Dresden suggests both sides of the Cold War recognized its importance but avoided direct confrontation over its spoils. Even today, Dresden's underworld remains a forbidden subject. Excavations during the city's reconstruction often encountered sealed concrete voids, officially explained as air raid shelters. Yet discrepancies between wartime city maps and modern foundations hint at whole districts where underground structures remain unaccounted for. In 2007, a construction crew repairing a tram line uncovered a rusted steel door beneath 20 feet of rubble. The door was welded shut, bearing remnants of German military paint. Authorities swiftly removed it, and the site was paved over within weeks. No official report was released. For survivors of the bombing, the city's underground secrets add a layer of bitterness. While tens of thousands burned in the firestorm, the regime that condemned them to die was busy hiding technology and archives for its own survival. For historians, Dresden is a reminder that beneath the tragedy of civilian loss lay a carefully calculated strategy of concealment. Whether the vaults held merely jet engines and synthetic fuels or something more esoteric may never be fully known. The surviving fragments, thermal anomalies, sealed tunnels, vague testimonies, and Soviet memoranda are the only evidence of what was buried. Dresden's ruins became a cemetery, not only for its people, but for the Reich's most closely guarded projects. The bombs that annihilated the city did not erase its secrets. They buried them deeper, where concrete, silence, and decades of denial have kept them hidden. Today, as archives slowly release fragments of the past, the image that emerges is not of a city bombed without purpose, but of one chosen precisely because of what it concealed. The underground vaults of Dresden steel remain locked, both physically and in the records, a forgotten battlefield where the true spoils of war were never recovered by those who sought them most. Chapter 3. The Silent Mutiny of U-864. At 10:30 hours on February 9, 1945, off the coast of Fedje, Norway, a British submarine made naval history. HMS Venturer, under the command of Lieutenant James Launders, tracked and destroyed the German submarine U-864 while both were submerged, a feat unique in the annals of submarine warfare. The official account describes it as a triumph of calculation and daring, the Royal Navy striking a decisive blow against Hitler's Kriegsmarine. Yet scattered intelligence reports and diver testimonies point to a darker layer. U-864 was not only on a clandestine mission to deliver advanced technology to Japan, but may have been the site of a mutiny, its final hours marked by chaos and betrayal within the steel hull. U-864's mission carried the codename Operation Caesar. Departing from Kiel in December 1944, the submarine was tasked with transporting critical war material to Imperial Japan. Its cargo reportedly included Messerschmitt jet engine parts, guidance systems for V-weapons, and over 1,800 steel flasks of liquid mercury, necessary for advanced explosives and fuels. The voyage represented the technological lifeline between two collapsing Axis powers, but intercepted Enigma traffic revealed delays, engine trouble, and uncharacteristic signals suggesting unrest among the crew. A decrypted message from January 1945 read simply, "Caesar falters. Command disputes aboard. Cargo priority remains." Analysts at Bletchley Park marked the phrasing as unusual, its wording inconsistent with standard Kriegsmarine format. What disputes could disrupt a mission of such importance? Evidence emerged in the 1970s when Norwegian salvage teams first investigated the wreck of U-864. Divers reported finding skeletal remains that appeared restrained within a compartment, ankle bones tangled with rusted shackles, vertebrae compressed unnaturally against the steel plating. The official salvage report dismissed these as entanglements with collapsed wreckage, but photographs circulated in naval intelligence circles told a more disturbing story. Shackles had little reason to exist on a U-boat unless for punishment or control. Survivors were never recorded, but the implication was that discipline aboard U-864 had broken down. Accounts from intercepted German communications add weight to this theory. In early February 1945, a signal transmitted from Bergen reported U-864 had suffered mechanical problems with its MAN engines. The submarine was ordered to put into Bergen for repairs, but left again hastily. Its commander, Kapitänleutnant Ralph Reimar Wolfram, reportedly under pressure to continue despite technical failure. Within days, signals intercepted by WWII service operators contained references to crew unrest and security breaches. One decrypt, now fragmentary, noted, orders not followed, discipline compromised. Caesar shipment at risk. The file was heavily redacted when released in 1985, raising speculation that mutiny had taken place on board. The mutiny theory suggests that a portion of the crew, aware of the war's impending collapse, sought to abandon the mission. Carrying tons of toxic mercury across Allied-controlled seas seems suicidal. Moreover, the idea of delivering jet technology to Japan, prolonging a hopeless conflict, may have seemed a betrayal of survival itself. If some crew members resisted, it would explain why restraints were allegedly used. U-boat records list a complement of 73 men on U-864, yet diver accounts suggest fewer bodies recovered than expected. Could some have been killed in a struggle before the submarine met its end? HMS Ventura's engagement is also unusual. Launders tracked U-864 acoustically for hours, noting erratic movements. Unlike standard evasive maneuvers, U-864's zigzagging path seemed irregular, almost desperate. One British after-action report noted the submarine appeared to oscillate without tactical coherence. Launders himself wrote, "Enemy behavior unpredictable, possibly due to malfunction or confusion. If U-864's crew was in disarray, fighting both internal conflict and a malfunctioning engine, their erratic path makes sense. It was less tactical evasion than chaos made visible. The torpedo attack that followed was remarkable. Launders fired 4 torpedoes at calculated intervals. 3 missed, but the 4th struck amidships, splitting U-864. The explosion scattered mercury flasks across the seabed, creating an environmental hazard that persists to this day. For decades, the wreck site remained sealed, its toxic cargo deemed too dangerous to recover. Norwegian authorities eventually encased it under sand and concrete, citing contamination risks. Yet some suggest this was also a convenient method of burying evidence: chains, documents, or bodies that might confirm mutiny. Intriguingly, in 2003, divers contracted by the Norwegian Coastal Administration claimed to have seen a rusted metal box wedged near the command section. The box bore a faint Reichsadler insignia and was quickly sealed off before removal. No official statement followed, but rumors persist. It contained communications logs or personal papers of the officers. If so, the box might reveal what really happened inside the submarine before it died beneath the waves. Declassified post-war interrogations of Kriegsmarine officers mention U-864 obliquely. Admiral Dönitz, questioned at Nuremberg, dismissed the mission as routine exchange. Yet, in a captured 1945 memorandum, he referred to Caesar as essential to Reich continuity. Continuity of what? If the shipment had succeeded, Japan might have acquired jet technology capable of stalling Allied advances in the Pacific. The desperation to complete the mission may explain Wolfram's decision to sail with a damaged vessel and a divided crew. In that pressure cooker, resistance by crewmen could only be dealt with ruthlessly. The most chilling testimony comes from a Norwegian fisherman, Arne Sørevik, who claimed to have intercepted German survivors floating near Fedje on the day of the sinking. Sørevik insisted that among the few bodies were 2 men whose hands were bound. He reported this to British authorities, but no record of his testimony appears in archives. His story resurfaced only in 1968 when he gave an interview to a local newspaper, quickly suppressed under pressure from Norwegian naval officials. If true, it provides physical evidence that crew members were restrained in the final hours. The silence around U-864 has lasted not only because of mercury contamination, but also because it touches on an uncomfortable narrative that one of the most celebrated Allied submarine victories may have destroyed a vessel already torn apart by internal collapse. Mutiny, in the iron discipline of the Kriegsmarine, was both unthinkable and unforgivable. Acknowledging it would mean admitting that even in Hitler's vaunted submarine arm, loyalty had fractured in the war's dying months. For the Allies, the mutiny story also complicates the legend of HMS Venturer. If the enemy was crippled not only by British skill, but also by self-destruction, the victory appears less absolute. In 2017, the Norwegian government announced plans to permanently entomb the wreck under concrete. Environmental safety was the official justification. Yet for researchers, the burial closed the last chance to investigate the interior, to recover shackles, documents, or boxes that might tell the truth. What lies sealed beneath the seabed is more than toxic mercury. It is the unresolved question of whether U-864 was sunk by enemy fire alone, or whether its crew had already turned against each other, fighting a silent mutiny in the final hours of a doomed mission. Thus, the wreck rests today, invisible beneath sand and steel, its secrets drowned with its crew. Operation Caesar is remembered as the mission that never reached Japan. U-864 remains a rare, technical triumph for the Royal Navy, but the whispers that echo through classified archives and diver recollections remind us that history rarely aligns neatly with official reports. Beneath the waves off Fedja lies not only a submarine grave but a battlefield of wills, where men bound by duty may have broken under the weight of a collapsing Reich. Chapter 4. The Shadow Agents of Operation Gladio. In the chaotic aftermath of 1945, as Europe rebuilt from the ruins of total war, a new conflict was already being engineered in the shadows. Behind the curtain of NATO's founding and the Marshall Plan's generous reconstruction, Allied intelligence began laying the groundwork for a clandestine network that would operate for decades, the stay-behind armies of Operation Gladio. Officially, their purpose was defensive, to resist a Soviet invasion of Western Europe by keeping caches of weapons, radios, and trained fighters hidden among the civilian population. But declassified documents and testimony gathered from parliamentary inquiries in Italy, Belgium, and Germany suggest that Gladio evolved into something darker. A hidden war waged not against the Red Army, but against the people of Europe themselves. The origins of Gladio can be traced to directives issued in 1947 by the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, and sanctioned by both the CIA and Britain's MI6. Dozens of secret armies were organized across Western Europe, manned by individuals chosen for loyalty, deniability, and ruthlessness. Many were former resistance fighters, but others were drawn from far more controversial pools. In Italy, ex-fascists and former SS officers were quietly integrated into the network under the logic that their hatred of communism outweighed their past crimes. A 1951 memorandum recovered from Italian military archives bluntly stated, "The reliability of former Axis cadres is unquestionable in the fight against Bolshevism. Recruitment is authorized." This decision set the stage for decades of blurred lines between defense and destabilization. Throughout the 1950s, Western Europe was rocked by unexplained bombings, assassinations, and coup attempts, many attributed to anarchists or left-wing extremists. Yet scattered evidence suggests that some of these incidents bore the fingerprints of Gladio operations. One notorious example was the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan in December 1969, which killed 17 civilians. Initial reports blamed leftist radicals, but declassified Italian intelligence documents later revealed involvement by right-wing extremists with documented ties to NATO's stay-behind networks. Witnesses claim to have seen men with foreign accents near the site, carrying equipment resembling military detonators. The official line remained unchanged for years, yet parliamentary investigators in the 1990s unearthed a cable from a NATO liaison officer describing the attack as an incident of strategic destabilization. Objectives achieved. The doctrine of strategic destabilization appears repeatedly in surviving Gladio papers. The theory held that controlled chaos, bombings, assassinations, and staged terror could be used to prevent communist parties from gaining political ground in Western Europe. If the public could be made to fear instability, they would rally to the protection of NATO-aligned governments. One 1962 British document from the Special Operations Branch referred to the strategy as sowing thorns on the road to Moscow. The thorns, however, were bombs planted in train stations, bullets fired at trade unionists, and fires set in the offices of journalists who questioned too much. Belgium too bore scars of Gladio's shadow. Between 1982 and 1985, the so-called Brabant killers terrorized supermarkets and civilians in a string of massacres that left 28 dead. The perpetrators were never identified, but ballistic evidence and testimony later suggested involvement by operatives with training beyond that of ordinary criminals. A Belgian parliamentary inquiry in 1991 uncovered caches of NATO-supplied weapons buried in forests near the massacre sites. Among them were American-made M16 rifles and plastic explosives, the type standard to Gladio arsenals. The files concluded that a strong probability exists of a link between stay-behind operatives and acts attributed to the Brabant killers. No indictments followed. In West Germany, Operation Gladio intersected with another notorious intelligence program, the recruitment of former Nazi officers into Western service. Men who had once served in the Abwehr and Waffen-SS found themselves operating under CIA and BND supervision, managing cells designed to resist Soviet occupation that never came. Some names appear again and again in Gladio-linked files, including Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, who was sheltered by Allied intelligence before being smuggled to South America. While Barbie's direct role in Gladio remains debated, his recruitment epitomized the moral compromises made in the name of anti-communism. For survivors of Nazi atrocities, the idea that their tormentors had been rearmed under NATO orders was a betrayal too bitter to confront. Whistleblowers paid dearly. In 1972, Italian magistrate Felice Casson began investigating a series of bombings misattributed to the left-wing Red Brigades. His inquiries led him to archives containing coded references to Gladio. Soon after, Casson was targeted by an attempted car bombing. He survived, but his colleagues urged him to abandon the investigation. It was not until 1990, when Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti was compelled by Parliament to admit Gladio's existence, that Casson's suspicions were vindicated. Even then, Andreotti insisted the network was purely defensive, its abuses isolated deviations. Yet hundreds of documents suggested otherwise. One of the most chilling came from a shredded memorandum reconstructed by Italian investigators in 1991. The document, attributed to NATO's Allied Clandestine Committee, advised, in order to maintain stability of the Atlantic Alliance, selective acts of violence may be employed to influence public opinion. Attribution should remain ambiguous. The memo's authenticity has been disputed, but its phrasing mirrors the operational logic evident in decades of unexplained bloodshed. For families of the victims, ambiguity offered no comfort. Eyewitnesses add further texture. Survivors of the Bologna train station bombing of 1980, which killed 85 people, recalled men in civilian clothes with distinctly British accents near the site hours before the blast. The attack was officially blamed on neo-fascists. Yet Bologna's prosecutors unearthed evidence linking some suspects to NATO training programs in Sardinia. Declassified photographs even showed British instructors posing with Italian recruits during joint exercises in 1978. The trail led back to Gladio's island bases, where clandestine units were drilled in sabotage, explosives, and guerrilla tactics. The suggestion that NATO personnel had mingled with perpetrators of a mass civilian bombing was a scandal too vast to acknowledge. By the late Cold War, Gladio had become less a defense plan than a web of rogue elements, politicians, and intelligence officers, all operating under the cover of NATO secrecy. When Andreotti's revelations broke in 1990, the public response was outrage, yet within months the story was drowned out by the fall of the Soviet Union. Gladio was quietly archived as a relic of the Cold War, its victims left without justice, its agents never named. The caches of weapons uncovered across Europe were sealed or destroyed, their inventories never fully disclosed. To this day, NATO refuses to release its full files on the stay-behind armies. Operation Gladio is remembered, when it is remembered at all, as a scandal of the margins, an aberration. Yet for those who have studied the fragments, intercepts, memoranda, testimonies, it represents something far more systematic. A hidden war waged not to repel an invasion that never came, but to manipulate the very societies the network claimed to protect. It blurred the line between security and subversion until both became indistinguishable. In its shadow, bombs fell, bullets were fired, and lives were lost without acknowledgement. The Cold War's most enduring casualty may not have been soldiers on the frontiers, but the civilians who lived and died under Gladio's silent watch. Chapter 5. The Lost Airfield at Spitsbergen Sound. The Arctic island of Spitsbergen, part of Norway's Svalbard archipelago, lies in one of the most inhospitable regions of the world. To most, its value during the Second World War was limited to weather reporting stations, the kind that provided crucial data for Atlantic convoy routes and air operations. Yet files unearthed after the Cold War and fragments from Soviet naval archives point to a deeper story. That beneath the ice and snow, the Luftwaffe attempted to build a forward operating base capable of reaching North America itself. What history records as a minor sideshow of raids and counter-raids may in fact conceal the remnants of Hitler's last great gamble in the Arctic. Spitsbergen was of strategic importance from the war's early years. In 1941, British and Norwegian forces destroyed German mining operations to deny the Reich access to coal and prevent use of the island as a base. That autumn, Operation Gauntlet evacuated civilians and left the island desolate. Officially, only weather stations remained, manned intermittently by German teams inserted by U-boat or long-range aircraft. But Soviet records, declassified in the 1990s, describe convoys of Kriegsmarine supply vessels in 1942 carrying far more than provisions. Listed among their cargo were prefabricated steel girders, crates marked Luftwaffe, Fliegerhorstbau, Airfield construction, and engineering detachments attached to Luftflotte 5. The implication: Germany intended not merely to observe the weather but to establish an airstrip. Supporting evidence emerges from reconnaissance flights conducted by RAF Coastal Command in 1943. Photographs, archived in London, show cleared patches of tundra along Isfjorden, one of the few flat valleys in Spitsbergen suitable for aircraft landings. Analysts at the time marked these as possible emergency strips, but Soviet intercepts described them as Segment Nord operation basis. If true, this codename referred to a forward Luftwaffe base designed to house reconnaissance aircraft such as the Ju-290, capable of transatlantic flights. With sufficient range, these aircraft might have conducted long-distance reconnaissance of Canadian ports, or even laid mines in North American waters. In September 1942, British and Canadian commandos launched Operation Fritham, an attempt to recapture Spitsbergen from German forces. The mission ended disastrously when the landing party was shelled by the Kriegsmarine, and most of the men were killed or captured. Surviving reports from Fritham mentioned structures resembling hangars, visible through the Arctic mist, though official accounts dismissed these as misidentified weather huts. Yet later testimony from Norwegian resistance agents claimed to have seen metal frames and fuel drums lined beside a graded field, suggesting that runway construction had at least begun. Whether complete or not, the project seems to have been abandoned by late 1943 as the tide of war turned against Germany. After the war, the Soviets took a particular interest in Spitsbergen. NKVD patrols stationed on the island between 1946 and 1948 sealed several valleys, barring local miners from entry. Internal memoranda discovered in Moscow in the 1990s reveal that former German installations of interest to aviation had been identified, including steel-frame structures partially destroyed by explosives. The document stopped short of confirming a full airfield, but emphasized the retrieval of engineering blueprints and construction notes. Some Soviet aviation historians now argue that German Arctic experiments influenced later Soviet development of polar runways for long-range bombers during the Cold War. American intelligence also suspected more. In 1957, U-2 spy planes photographed Spitsbergen as part of routine Arctic surveillance. Among the images, declassified in 1998, are faint outlines of rectangular clearings buried under ice. Analysts mark them as possible German remnants, unknown function. One photograph shows 3 parallel lines etched into the tundra, consistent with runway grading. Though nature had reclaimed much of the terrain, the geometric patterns stood out against the natural contours. No follow-up was authorized, The Cold War climate made challenging Soviet control of Svalbard politically sensitive. Norwegian miners added further pieces to the puzzle. In 1953, workers near Barentsburg reportedly broke into a sealed bunker lined with German inscriptions. Inside, they claimed to have found rusting fuel canisters, aircraft tires, and collapsed metal trusses. Within days, Norwegian authorities closed the shaft and relocated the crew. Their testimonies, recorded only in local newspapers, vanished quickly under official silence. By the late 1960s, locals whispered that entire sections of Spitsbergen remained off-limits, not because of environmental hazards, but because of war ruins the government does not wish to discuss. The strategic implications of a Spitsbergen airfield are staggering. If completed, it would have placed Germany within striking distance of the North American mainland. Even if incapable of sustaining large bomber operations, reconnaissance flights could have monitored Allied shipping lanes, sowed panic, or forced the diversion of resources to defend the continent. By 1944, as Germany faced collapse on all fronts, such a base may have been intended less as an offensive platform than as a bargaining chip, proof that the Reich could still threaten Allied homelands. That the project failed may explain its near-total erasure from official history. Environmental surveys in the early 2000s reignited speculation. Scientists measuring permafrost melt discovered anomalous heat signatures beneath layers of ice near Adventfjorden, consistent with buried metallic structures. Ground-penetrating radar suggested voids lined with reinforced material, though funding for excavation was denied. When independent researchers requested access, the Norwegian government cited heritage protection and refused permits. For conspiracy theorists, this was confirmation that remnants of a German airfield, possibly intact, still lay beneath the ice. For historians, the story of Spitsbergen illustrates how war can leave shadows far from the main theatres of combat. What has long been written off as a remote skirmish may in fact conceal one of the Reich's last desperate gambits. The evidence is circumstantial but consistent. Supply manifests referencing airfield construction, reconnaissance photos showing cleared tundra, Soviet documents describing retrieved aviation structures, and eyewitness accounts of hangar-like ruins. Each fragment alone can be dismissed. Together, they form the outline of a story too inconvenient for official histories to acknowledge. The Arctic preserves its secrets well. Ice entombs steel, snow conceals runways, and governments prefer silence to confrontation. The lost airfield at Spitsbergen Sound may never be excavated, its remnants buried deeper as the decades pass. Yet its shadow remains, a reminder that in the frozen north, far from Berlin or Normandy, the Reich may have tried to carve a final bridgehead toward the New World. Whether as myth, misdirection, or suppressed truth, Spitsbergen's legacy is one of unfinished ambition, a forgotten battlefield where the war's endgame extended all the way to the edge of the Arctic Circle. The last echoes of the war never truly faded. They retreated underground, sealed in bunkers, scattered across seas, whispered only in coded fragments. What we are left with is not clarity, but distortion, as though history itself were a radio signal filled with static, carrying voices we were never meant to hear. The fragments demand unease, because they hint at a world where loyalties are fluid, victories uncertain, and truth the first casualty left behind. Each concealed document, each erased testimony, is less an ending than a warning, that silence is a weapon as powerful as any gun, and memory itself can be engineered. In these shadows, the war is not over. It lingers, a cold breath in forgotten corridors, daring us to follow its echo into the places where light has never reached.